I really like Marty's truck.
That's that firing
Well,
pump.
it's a truck that's in Marty's picture. No one actually knows if it's his or not.
Yep, it's a 1972 Chev Blazer custom
Nice.
sport truck,
That is nice.
which means that's a very rare in that year because it had the 350 V8 with the 350 automatic with bucket seats,
Yep.
air conditioning, and a tachometer.
Wow.
And back then that was very rare. And it is a factory convertible.
Wow.
And that there is a Chevy Camaro SS. Is that your car, Byron?
That's my daughter's car.
Oh my, your daughter's car?
What?
My grandfather, or sorry, my dad, her grandfather, and my brother built it for her.
Wow.
Okay,
I
we're
just-
live.
For her.
Are
Wow.
you adopting? Are your anyone adopting anyone?
Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone
thought that too.
everybody can hear what
Why
you're
didn't you get
saying.
me something like that, Dad?
Wow.
He did most of the audio.
I call the public hearing for bylaw 6265 Municipal Development Plan to order. I will first read the acknowledgement statement. The City of
Hey, Chris,
Lethbridge...
can we have everyone mute, please? There's some kind of weird buzzing in the background.
Okay, it's Councillor Campbell, apparently.
There's
Mark
still
is
people
muted.
that aren't muted.
Councillor Campbell, can you please mute?
He is muted.
Okay. Okay, I will now read the
blaming-
acknowledgement statement. The City of Lethbridge acknowledges that we are gathered in the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot people, past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. The City of Lethbridge is also the home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. I'll now ask for a roll call.
The roll call for the Municipal Development Plan public hearing, Councillor Campbell.
Present.
Councillor Carlson.
Present.
Councillor Kaufman.
Present.
Councillor Croson. Councillor Croson. She was there.
She was here.
Councillor Morrow.
Yep.
Councillor Parker.
Here.
Councillor Higgin.
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Miyashiro.
Here.
And Mayor Spearman.
Present.
Councillor Croson. So we'll just watch out for her. The rest of the members of council are in attendance.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question for you before you start.
Okay.
And this question could be the city solicitor too. Over the last few days, we've been getting emails from citizens in regards to the municipal development plan, which I've tried not to read or look at. And we've also had phone messages. Mr. Lowen, are we allowed to read those emails as we right now in between the meetings? Are we allowed to take these phone calls that are being left for us? Are we allowed to do any of that during these hearings?
That's a great question, and in terms of the advice that I've given before, I'd again reiterate that it's not a matter of being allowed or not allowed. There's no rule against it. Where the legal guidance comes from is if someone was to challenge this process from a procedural fairness point of view. So if what you're doing in terms of not paying attention to them is allowable, if you wanted to hear it and wanted it to be part of the public hearing, I would say the only thing you could do to mitigate the risk to the process would be to come here today and summarize what you've heard and present it to all of your fellow members of council. That in and of itself has its own risks, but that would be something you could do if you chose, if you were of the mind that you should be paying attention to those.
Yeah, and I thank you for that, Mr. Lowen, because I think most of us have probably had phone calls from certain individuals and all that, and I don't know what they've done, but I just want to know what we can and cannot do, and I think that adds a bit of clarification for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I haven't had phone calls and I haven't responded to any, so if anybody has, they have information that I don't, so. Okay, the procedure for this hearing will be, City Council has scheduled 4 days for public hearings for the Municipal Development Plan. This is the third day. The topics for today will focus on community well-being, places, and housing policies. We will begin by calling upon a member of the Municipal Development Plan team to provide the background to the case. Anyone else who wishes to speak on this bylaw will then be called upon. We will then ask 3 times if there is anybody else who wishes to make a presentation. City Council will then have the opportunity to ask questions of any of the presenters. The hearing will then be adjourned for the day and will continue tomorrow. In order to ensure that the matter being discussed is given due process and aligns with the principles of natural justice and procedural fairness, the best practice is for members of City Council to refrain from communicating in any capacity about this matter with members of the public until the vote on the bylaw has taken place. City Council's decision should be based on information that is read, heard, and discussed as part of the public hearing. In that way, all members of City Council are privy to the same information, received at the same time, that has been vetted through debate, and that there is a shared and equal understanding of the matter at hand. I now call upon Maureen Gehring, Manager of Planning, to provide the background to the case. Ms. Gehring, go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, Your Worship and members of City Council. Welcome to the third day of the MDP public hearings. Next slide, please, Janessa. Yesterday, we had, again, great conversation about the policy areas listed on the slide for March 30th, transportation, utilities and servicing, and the environment. Now that we're on our third day of hearings, I think we're all sort of in the flow for the question and answer component of the hearings. And so we'll just move on to our next slide, please, Janessa. Today we continue with our review of the MDP policy sections and policy topics. Next slide, please. And we are on section number 5. Next slide, Janessa. And so it is my pleasure to turn the presentation over to Genesis Havia-Orio, who will lead us off with the community well-being section. Next slide, please, Janessa. Go ahead, Genesis.
Am I muted? My computer says that I'm...
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Maureen. I will begin by providing an overview of the policy structure. We identified 9 different policy topics, and each of these are divided into subsections. Each subsection has stated a policy objective, and policies under it strive to meet that objective. The policies are followed by directions that outline the work that needs to be completed in order to implement the policies. Next slide, please. We have incorporated intent levels that speak to the level of commitment as well as the city's operational reach. The intent terms include ensure, promote, and support, with ensure being the most aligned with City Council's priorities and within operational city jurisdiction. It is important to note that the intent levels are not associated with a specified timeline and do not have a deadline to be completed by. Next slide, please. Today, community well-being is the first topic to be presented. Community well-being provides an overall guidance to be inclusive and equitable in the delivery of our services and operations. It speaks about the health and the well-being of individuals, community pride and civic engagement, as well as safety. I will begin by sharing a few insights that inform the subsections under this topic. Our growing population and the well-being of residents includes the provision of social support programs that address unique challenges of every resident. City administration has a role to play in facilitating community-focused services and supports that are considerate of trends, issues impacting residents' well-being in Lethbridge as well. Increasing livability in the city includes creating people places for everyone, and this is rooted in building community understanding and connections between residents. The city and the community are on a reconciliation journey, and with the successes we have had, there's still more work to do. In Lethbridge and across Canada, Indigenous people experience systemic challenges in attaining housing, employment, and property ownership. Indigenous people and marginalized populations continue to face inaccurate, harmful stereotypes that hinder their full potential and development, and providing opportunities for connection and understanding between residents of all cultural and socioeconomic backgrounds does have the potential to eliminate misconceptions and negative stereotypes. And the City of Lethbridge does have a role to play supporting this work. A more easily identifiable aspect of well-being is a person's physical and mental well-being. Physical health opportunities are provided by many cross-sector organizations with strong efforts to ensure that these are financially attainable and physically accessible to all residents. There's a tangible component to this, such as recreation facilities and our extensive parks and open space network. These assets will need continuous attention to meet the community's evolving needs in the future. Mental health is quite complex, and for this reason, the MDP focuses on two factors that create mental stressors that the city could help ease. One of them is access to housing, and the second one is a person's experience of discrimination and racism in our city. And lastly, I will share about meaningful engagement. Civic engagement includes public participation, volunteering, and community building opportunities. A municipal government that prioritizes meaningful engagement has a better probability of meeting community's needs and fostering community pride. Delivering meaningful engagement is rooted in value-based conversations, and the feedback received through this engagement is at minimum reflected in the decisions or outcomes being discussed. We'll begin with the first policy subsection under the community well-being topic. The first one is inclusion and compassion, with the objective to foster an environment of inclusivity and provide a welcoming community for all residents and visitors. Sorry, Janessa, next slide. The objective and the related policies are a result of shared aspirations identified in the guiding documents listed here. These documents speak about reducing stigma and promoting understanding regarding mental health, substance use, crime and safety, racism, and discrimination. Ensuring our services, programs, and facilities are inclusive and accessible, as well as developing tailored supports to address the healing needs of Indigenous people. These documents also speak about inspiring Aboriginal peoples and Canadians in a process of reconciliation and renewed relationships that are based on mutual understanding and respect. And the documents also encourage public involvement in community events, festivals, and celebrations to foster a sense of belonging. Next slide, please. Building on the shared aspirations, the public and stakeholder feedback received shed light on the racism that is experienced in our city, including discrimination that results in difficulties attaining housing, and also everyday transgressions that chip away at a person's feelings of safety in our city. Combating racism is not a task for the city to solely undertake, and it does require everyone's efforts. However, the city is in the position to set an example by providing city employees with intercultural competency and Indigenous awareness training, and if available and appropriate, the city also could extend these resources to outside organizations. The policies found under this subsection build on the ICSB MDP policies and better reflect the experience of marginalized communities who face racism and discrimination. And this policy subsection also provides guidance for all people seeking ways to contribute to people, places for all. Next slide, please. The next subsection is healthy and active living, with the objective to advance opportunities for healthy and well-being of residents of all ages. Policy guidance for this subsection is found in the documents listed here, and these documents speak about exploring opportunities for unstructured recreation, ensuring facilities are affordable and accessible and also meet people's needs, and also providing well-rounded recreation opportunities. Next slide. The public and stakeholder feedback received aligned with the policy guidance and supported using recreation as a means to connect people to nature, as well as the need to address the gaps that exist between the facility, space, and growing community needs. The policies found under this subsection reinforce the work that the city continues to do, and with the hopes to ensure that this high-level direction is available for years to come. Next slide, please. The City Support Program subsection has the objective to further support programs to involve the well-being of residents. The documents listed here provide recommendations for this subsection and are focused on the following: contributing to a resilient food system, improving service delivery based on community needs, trends, and issues, strengthening partnerships with organizations that improve the quality of life of residents, and attaining permanent supportive housing for priority populations. Next slide, please. The public and stakeholder feedback informed important aspects of the policies under this subsection. It was reinforced that the need to consider food security and healthy food choices is important to the community. We learned that a person's concerns about quality, accessibility, and affordability of housing cause mental stressors, and solutions to access housing are definitely complex. We also learned that the city is in a position to support housing provision for the community. And although when these propositions come forward for City Council to make decisions on, we do hear from people who are in opposition. However, along with this opposition, there is community support to support the most vulnerable. The policies found under this subsection identify support mechanisms that the city could support and also provide strategic direction to fill the service gaps in our community. Next slide, please. Civic engagement policy subsection has the objective to cultivate civic pride and enrich the public participation experience of residents. The guiding documents listed here speak about strengthening partnerships with organizations that improve the quality of life of Lethbridge residents, and also encourage the relationships with neighborhood associations. Next slide, please. The public and stakeholder feedback received was in support of the objective, and it confirmed that the policies supported the relationship building between the city and neighbor associations, as well as with community organizations, and that the city should deliver meaningful community engagement and open communications about any undertakings the city is doing. The policies under this subsection carry forward the guidance found in the ICSP MDP and also identify ways for us to deliver better civic engagement. Next slide, please. Moving on to the last policy subsection, which is safety, with the objective to uphold public safety and security for all residents. The guiding documents provided a starting point and encouraged the need to increase personal and public safety in our city. Next slide, please. The public and stakeholder feedback received from our Indigenous partners identified the links between culture and safety. This is an important discussion that needs to develop outside of the MDP. However, this insight inspired Policy 57, which speaks about celebrating one's culture and heritage without the fear of discrimination. The updated policies identify tools such as crime prevention through environmental design, hazard risk vulnerability assessments, and placemaking. And this concludes the community wellbeing policy topic, and I'll pass it on to Ross Kilgore to review the housing policy topic with you.
Thank you, Genesis. Good afternoon, everyone. Next slide, please. So along with food and clothing, housing is one of the three basic human needs, yet everyone's housing needs are different. So how do we try to ensure we have a range of housing in Lethbridge that meets everyone's needs in terms of location, space, cost, and other factors? In the past few years, Council have placed significant focus on this issue. City Council Strategic Plan 2017 led to Council creating the Municipal Housing Task Force to provide oversight to the community consultation and research process to produce a final municipal housing strategy, which was completed in 2019. The Municipal Housing Strategy defines strategic directions to improve supply along the entire housing continuum and is based on a comprehensive needs assessment, as well as multiple engagement activities with local residents, housing stakeholders, and vulnerable population groups. In October 2019, Council resolved to proceed with the implementation of the Municipal Housing Strategy. As a result of this extensive effort, many of the new policies in this topic have their basis in recommendations made by the MHS Implementation Plan. It's important to note before we go on that the city itself is not a housing provider. Our role is to shape the regulatory environment for the best outcomes, facilitate and bring providers and partners together, and collaborate with all levels of government, the private sector, community organisations, and non-profit agencies. So the policies in this topic focus on enabling the provision of a range of housing types, densities, locations, and tenures. And I'll go through each one of those briefly. So housing types, obviously we have single detached, duplexes, suites, townhomes, apartments, and so on. Nearly 2/3 of households in Lethbridge contain just one or two persons. Further, the share of couples with children as a proportion of all households is decreasing, while the share of couples without children and single-person families as a proportion of all households is increasing. This trend is expected to continue over the next 20 years. So in this long-term plan, we need to make sure we're giving people with small households a range of options in terms of housing types. Living in smaller units can also decrease challenges related to home maintenance, for example, for seniors and people with disabilities. Turning to densities. People tend to conflate the word density with meaning apartments, but in reality, density can vary greatly between and within the same housing types. It's important to remember in conversations around density that this one metric on its own can be misleading in terms of what a development actually looks like and how it fits in with its surroundings. You can have two housing types with the same internal square footage, but one may be perceived to be higher density for other reasons. For example, imagine two small apartment buildings with the exact same size, shape, and number of units. One has an underground parkade, the other has surface parking, perhaps doubling the size of the parcel. The apartments with the underground parking would show up as being twice the density of the apartments with the surface parking, despite having the same size building and the same number of people living there. So at its heart, when we talk about density, we have to remember that it's a measurement of how efficiently we provide homes versus the area of land consumed. More efficient use of land means less roadway area and fewer meters of utilities and services such as water and sewer pipes per home. Turning to housing locations, so we're not just talking about residential only areas, but also, of course, housing mixed into commercial areas and the downtime. And then housing tenures, we talk about things like market ownership, rental, non-market housing, etc. The full housing continuum is provided on page 122 of the MDP. And it's important to note that a shift to rental housing is occurring in Lethbridge. From 2006 to 2016, the number of renter households has increased as a proportion of all households. However, the number of rental dwellings in the primary market decreased by 9.6% from 2006 to 2017. The oldest surviving housing in Lethbridge is little more than 120 years old. As our older neighbourhoods age, we're naturally going to continue to see increased redevelopment activity as some of this stock is replaced. This is a good thing, as international trends over the past several decades have led to smaller household sizes, meaning the number of people per home. This in turn has led to shrinking populations in older neighbourhoods. For example, London Road is now about 30% smaller population than it was at its peak in the 1950s. So it's important that we realise a smaller population in a given neighbourhood may not support existing services and businesses, such as schools, transit and retail. We need to help older neighbourhoods recover lost population while maintaining what residents love about their neighbourhoods. For example, by adding suites and duplexes and townhomes and apartments in appropriate locations. Our outer growth areas today, our greenfield areas, will one day have to also adapt and redevelop, just like our century-old neighbourhoods do today. So we need to ensure that we're building in adaptability to our new neighbourhoods from the outset. There's a famous John Ruskin quote that says, "When we build, let us think that we build forever." And it's usually interpreted to mean that we should build things to a near perfect finished state and preserve them that way forever, unchanging. And that was certainly that attitude for much of the 20th century in terms of city building. But city builders today realize that cities are organic. And so when we think that we build forever, we have to build Lethbridge in a way that's adaptable and resilient to the constant change that we'll see in the decades and centuries to come. As with the other topics, the housing topic adapts policies from the existing ICSP MDP to be more precise, implementable and measurable. This topic also draws heavily on the Municipal Housing Strategy Implementation Plan, among other planned strategies and studies completed since 2010. Next slide, please. So our first subsection is affordable, accessible and supportive housing. And this subsection's objective is to ensure that Lethbridge has a range of housing that meets everyone's needs. 6 of the 14 policies here are adapted from the current MDP, and the new policies here have their basis in the MHS Implementation Plan and the SSRP Economy and Tourism Inventory. Next slide, please. We heard through our Indigenous engagement activities that Indigenous peoples face challenges when obtaining housing and accessing services. The city can provide more support through sharing information on how to access services, programs and funding, and this has been incorporated into policy here. We also heard that racism affects housing options, for example, who to rent to. This has been incorporated into the housing policy topic introduction. We heard through the housing survey a number of key themes, including that there's a lack of affordable housing currently available, and affordable housing is a very important need for participants. So pulling it all together, as I mentioned, the Municipal Housing Strategy was completed in 2019 and it provided a lot of detail on our housing needs in the city. A number of recommendations from that strategy have been elevated into policy here. Next slide, please. Turning to development patterns and infill, this subsection's objective is to minimise the urban footprint of Lethbridge by using land more efficiently. 2 of the 4 policies here are adapted from the current MDP, and the new policies are based on Municipal Housing Strategy Implementation Plan and the Efficient Land Use Strategy. Next slide, please. We heard through the housing survey that it's important to increase density to limit urban sprawl. We also heard that there should be a buffer between high density and low density neighbourhoods. The location of increased density needs to be strategic and impacts to adjacent residents should be limited. We also heard from Build that public land uses such as roads need to be continuously reviewed to ensure efficiency, lower costs for the municipality. And so, pulling it all together, the Efficient Land Use Strategy identified more specific ways to make efficient use of land, for example, minimum density in new outline plans, and the updated MDP provides greater detail on what criteria ARPs, area redevelopment plans, should focus on, for example, in determining appropriate locations for intensification. Next slide, please. Housing types. So this subsection's objective is to support the development of diverse housing forms and types, and 2 of the 3 policies here are adapted from the current MDP, though all 3 of them are also influenced by the Municipal Housing Strategy. Next slide, please. We heard through the housing survey that the city should take an active role in providing development regulation and/or provide guidelines to ensure a variety of housing options are available. So the Municipal Housing Strategy placed greater focus on opportunities to expand choice in the land use bylaw, for example, allowing suites in more residential districts. In fact, the Municipal Housing Strategy carried out a statistically significant telephone survey, which found that 68% of respondents were supportive or very supportive of permitting duplexes in all residential districts, and 68% were supportive or very supportive of permitting secondary suites in all residential districts. So this has been addressed in Policy 70. Next slide, please. Turning to innovation. This subsection's objective is to explore options for partnerships and financial incentives for the development of the full spectrum of housing choice. So neither of the 2 policies here are adapted from the current MDP. They're both new, and they come from the Municipal Housing Strategy Implementation Plan and the SSRP Relationship Inventory. Next slide, please. We heard through our Indigenous engagement the importance of seeking co-creation and co-delivery of programmes, initiatives and services. And we heard from Build that supportive and affordable housing types should not be a blanket target in every neighbourhood. Most effective would be the placement in strategic locations that are supported not only by transit, but also other amenities like proximity to green spaces, schools and employment centres. And this is reflected in the draft policies. So pulling this together, the policies here seek to support innovation and work with partners to achieve affordable housing. Next slide, please. So turning to 5.5, the policy topic of places. How we shape the places that make up our lives in turn shapes our quality of life, our work, opportunities, wealth, safety, and even mental health. So first of all, let's talk about the place that is Lethbridge as a whole. Blackfoot and other Indigenous peoples have lived and thrived in Secaucus for thousands of years for resource gathering and spiritual use. There's evidence of major wintering camps in the river valley between here and Tabor, housing up to 1,800 people. So this was a special place long before Lethbridge was incorporated. So why is this policy topic called places rather than, say, land use or development? Many of the other policy topics in the MDP focus on a specific type of infrastructure, such as transportation or utilities and servicing. But these things are all built and maintained in service of a bigger whole, great places to live. So this policy topic tries to bring together many different concepts to help us build and sustain great places in Lethbridge. It's arranged into subsections that look at different broad categories of place, such as commercial or parks and open space, as well as some very specific unique places like downtown or the river valley. Today, we recognise that mixing uses is critical to enabling walkable, livable, sustainable places. When we talk about how Lethbridge can be a sustainable city for the future, we tend to think of tackling direct sources of emissions like switching to electric vehicles or cleaning up the electric grid. But what often gets overlooked is the inherent sustainability or unsustainability that's built into the very layout of the city. If people have the ability to access most of their daily needs within a comfortable walking distance, which is usually said to be 10 minutes or about 750 meters, then at least a proportion of people will choose to do so at least some of the time. If we build Lethbridge to have all our commercial uses and our workplaces separated from our homes, then almost everyone will feel they have no choice but to drive everywhere. And when everybody needs to drive everywhere, then the roads have to be wider to accommodate the traffic, and the roads get wider, everything's now spread even further apart, and it becomes a vicious cycle. So by striving for complete neighbourhoods with easy access to local businesses and services, we can also make more efficient use of land, reduce travel distances and travel times, and make active travel a viable choice for more journeys. While there are many aspects of building a sustainable future for our residents that fall to other levels of government, how we choose to build and lay out our city is a critical piece of the puzzle. It's very much our responsibility to get right. By allowing more residential uses in commercial areas and vice versa, we can enable places to thrive. This means more local customers for businesses. We know this from the downtown, but really it applies everywhere. And so this helps to implement Council's strategic goal of pedestrian-friendly places in Council's strategic plan. And with an ageing population, we need to consider age-friendly community design, another strategic goal from Council's strategic plan. Policies in this topic also elevate the work of the Mobility Accessibility Master Plan in this respect. While we want people to be able to access most of their daily needs within a comfortable walk of their homes, we also recognise that our downtown is a special place. It's a neighbourhood that in many ways is all of Lethbridge's neighbourhood. Policies in this topic seek to improve the statutory and regulatory environment to promote a thriving downtown and to commit to downtown as the preferred location for future major cultural facilities, festivals, events and gatherings, as well as for special aesthetic and design treatments. We also need to make sure our industrial area remains attractive for industrial operators and that incompatible uses aren't allowed into those areas because that can risk making it difficult for future industrial uses. And finally, although the airport remains in the county today, this is a long-range plan, and so we need to make sure we're planning ahead for how the airport will integrate with our existing and future land uses in the coming years. Next slide, please. So our first subsection in places is parks and open spaces. The objective here is to preserve and enhance Lethbridge's parks and open space system to ensure access is available to all. 4 of the 13 policies here are adapted from the current MDP, and the new policies have their basis in Council Strategic Plan and the SSRP Environment and Historic Resources Strategy. Next slide, please. We heard through our Indigenous engagement that it's important to understand the value of natural environments and how they've traditionally been used. We heard that educational physical markers in public places, such as plaques, cairns, place names, and other areas of significance, can help build understanding and acceptance. And we also heard that we have to allow Indigenous peoples to practice their cultures. So pulling this together, the environment strategy placed more focus on biodiversity and protecting natural spaces than we previously had. We also need to ensure that we acknowledge and protect Aboriginal and treaty rights, for example, their use of parks in the River Valley, and take opportunities to build understanding. So this has been incorporated into policy here. Next slide, please. The River Valley. The objective here is to ensure that the unique character of the Oldman River Valley is conserved and enhanced. And all 4 policies in this subsection are adapted from the current MDP. Next slide, please. We heard from Environment Lethbridge that the protection and management of the River Valley remains a key priority for environmental sustainability in the city. And really what we've done here is adapted the existing policies from the MDP to the new format to make them more defined and measurable. Next slide, please. Turning to commercial land. So this subsection's objective is to provide sufficient opportunities for commercial development and activity in appropriate locations throughout the city. All the policies here are new, and they have their basis in Council Strategic Plan, the Destination Management Plan, and the SSRP Efficient Land Use Strategy. Next slide, please. We heard through the Policy Objectives Survey the importance of integration of housing within commercial development to promote a more walkable and livable city and attract and retain young working professionals. So there's a linkage there back to the local economy. So pulling this together, there's a focus here on the city's role as an enabler. So for example, maintaining a regular commercial land inventory and market analysis, making use of the public right of way to support commercial uses such as parklets, sidewalk patios, or temporary road closures for events. And we're seeking stronger requirements around commercial developments having pedestrian accessibility. Next slide, please. Industrial. This subsection's objective is to maintain a sufficient supply of industrial land and support the intensification of industrial land uses where appropriate. One of the 3 policies here is adapted from the current MDP, and the new policies are based on the SSRP Efficient Land Use Strategy and Economy and Tourism Inventory. Next slide, please. We heard from Economic Development Lethbridge that Lethbridge has a competitive advantage with turnkey infrastructure for industrial development. So industrial parcels are developed by the city with utility services in place. There are more definite actions here to review regulations to allow more efficient use of land in industrial parcels. There are new policies to encourage or discourage certain other land uses in and around industrial areas. This is a recognition of the importance of maintaining existing heavy and general industrial uses. For example, discouraging commercial land uses that are incompatible with industrial areas. We see a lot of interest in moving commercial uses into the industrial area due to lower costs. Next slide, please. Turning to neighbourhoods, this subsection's objective is to build and sustain neighbourhoods that are people-centric and innovative, that support a sustainable development pattern with a mix of land uses and allow most residents to meet their daily needs within walking distance of their homes. 3 of the 5 policies here are adapted from the current MDP, and the new policies are based on Council Strategic Plan, SSRP Efficient Land Use Strategy, and the Reconciliation Implementation Plan. Next slide, please. We heard through the housing survey that there's a lack of affordable housing currently available, and affordable housing is a very important need for participants. We also heard the city should take an active role in providing development regulation and/or provide guidelines to ensure a variety of housing options are available. We also heard it's important to increase density to limit urban sprawl. We heard through our Indigenous engagement sessions that we should identify meaningful opportunities for Indigenous groups to be part of future land use planning. And we heard from Heather Simon Assets that there's not very suitable substantive land tracts in the downtown core. Development will likely need to occur outside the downtown core, with opportunities reviewed on how to filter into the downtown core. So pulling all this together, there's a greater focus here on actionable ways to encourage development of walkable neighbourhoods, both old and new. There's a priority list of neighbourhoods for which to prepare area redevelopment plans. There's support for ageing in place, and there's concrete action on reconciliation in land use planning by requiring traditional knowledge in land use studies. Next slide, please. New growth. So this subsection's objective is to responsibly and efficiently manage the growth of Lethbridge's urban area into adjacent agricultural and previously undeveloped land. Half of the policies are adapted from the current MDP, and the others have their basis in the SSRP Environment and Historic Resources Strategy and the Economy and Tourism Inventory. Next slide, please. We heard from Build that public land and infrastructure such as sidewalks, roads, bike lanes, utility corridors, storm ponds, and open space places a burden on the taxpayer, and they also told us that design standards should be carefully examined and evaluated on a continuous basis. Pulling this all together, we have a new policy which refers to Appendix C of the MDP, which provides great detail on municipal reserve and school reserve. We will complete annexation of the airport by 2028 in line with the agreement with the county, and we're requiring an outline plan be completed before any expansion of current business around the airport. Next slide, please. Downtown. The objective here is to continue to develop downtown as the heart of our city, a place that enhances the quality of life of all Lethbridge citizens. Two of the three policies here are adapted from the current MDP, and the other sources involved are Council Strategic Plan and the SSRP Economy and Tourism Inventory. Next slide, please. We heard through the policy objective survey that people would like to see more mid to luxury housing in the downtown, and that downtown should be a safe and vibrant part of the city. We have some additional policy here to implement Council's focus on a pedestrian-friendly downtown, so enhancing public space and requiring a minimum 50% of building frontage be on streets, that is not set back behind parking. Next slide, please. Design and built form is the last subsection in places. So the objective here is to design and build Lethbridge in a sustainable manner. 4 of the 8 policies are adapted from the current MDP, and the new ones have their basis in Council Strategic Plan and the SSRP Efficient Land Use Strategy and Environment and Historic Resources Strategy, as well as the Municipal Housing Strategy Implementation Plan. Next slide, please. We heard through the housing survey that the transit system is not used enough to support higher density developments in transit corridors. And so this subsection directs administration to review the land use bylaw and infrastructure design standards to ensure our landscaping requirements contribute to sustainable development. It tells us to review parking requirements and parking lot design requirements to ensure they're fit for purpose. For example, we'll look at the potential for removing minimum parking requirements, and it meets Council's focus on pedestrian-friendly commercial areas, as well as elevating mobility accessibility master plan actions. Next slide, please. So that concludes this part of the presentation.
Thank you. Mr. Sarsfield, can you just comment on some technical issues we're having with streaming?
Sure. So on the city website, we have a spot where people can link on to live streaming and they could watch the proceedings. Currently, that is not working. We are still recording it, and it is currently through YouTube, which you can access for those that wish on through our Twitter account. We will have it posted to our regular website tomorrow. We'll import it in, but just thought I'd report out that's what we're doing. So we are still recording, and we're still proceeding.
Okay, for clarification, that Twitter account is @Leth City Clerk. Okay. Okay, we'll continue. Is that the end of the presentation by administration? Okay. Okay, we're now going to move. Yes.
Sorry, Carlson here. Is that technical error affecting the on-base agenda or the online agenda? Mine shut down and now I can't reopen it. So I'm wondering if that technical error is bigger than just the streaming.
I had the same issue.
So if you wish to access the agenda, you could go to a previous agenda because we've posted them all, the information to another account, so you could go through that. I know IT is working on it right now, and so they may have brought some of it down with it at the same time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor Spearman.
Okay, we'll move on to public presentations. As a reminder, presenters will have 5 minutes to speak to the issue. Our first presenter is Ms. Bridget Mearns from Build.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for this opportunity to present to you on the Municipal Development Plan. I also want to take a second here and thank Ross for his presentation. We heard him reference Build a number of times, and he also said we heard. So I really appreciate that. We did notice our influence in the policies, and we did feel heard. So thank you very much for that. I also want to acknowledge that I have Perry Neufeld, the president of Build Lethbridge, also on this meeting, who's available for any questions you may have after the presentation. So today I'm bringing you some of the industry comments that we've received over the housing and places policies. Change slide, please. The first policy we want to bring to your attention is policy 64. There's 3 parts to this policy, really. One is disallowing amendments to outline plans based on this density target. One is the density target itself, and the third is discussing efficient land use. That's the order I'm going to discuss how we talked about this particular policy. Next slide, please. So the first concern here is that disallowing any amendments to outline plans. What this really does in essence, if there is a market change, these outline plans, as you know, are done in advance. If there's any changes to the market, they have to amend the outline plan to adapt that. By having a policy that disallows any changes to an outline plan based on that density target could be problematic. If, for example, there's a parcel of land within a neighborhood that's zoned too high, the density is too high, and they have to change it down, maybe the market is already saturated with that type of product. This could affect the developer having the ability to do that. So we feel it's restrictive and could end up actually making it more difficult for developers to complete out their neighborhoods. The second is the density targets. We do believe it's achievable, but again, we have to talk about where that's achievable. So this is net residential, which means that's in the portion of the developable land. And again, we see density targets as a shared responsibility with the city. So we have to look at efficient land use, as I presented to you yesterday, and I think Ross has referred to that a number of times as well. So it's our recommendation that this policy be removed altogether as being too restrictive. And if, at the very least, removing the disallowing point on that policy. Next slide, please. Policy 69, very similar concerns here. If we've interpreted the policy correctly, the NDP would dictate to a private landowner what product they can build. So not where or what, but exactly dictate how many units and what those units might look like. So if an investor has a business case to build a small apartment complex, they should build what the market will allow and what the market is asking for. To have an MDP policy that dictates the number of bedrooms and the size of the units, I think is an overreach here and could end up discouraging investment in possibly units that we do want to encourage being built. So our recommendation here is to change this to support from ensure. Next policy, or next slide, thank you. These are a number of policies. Again, this goes to our discussion around land efficiency, just making sure that when we're talking about expansion of parks and access, that we're also giving some thought to what that means down the long term. We certainly understand and appreciate the open spaces and parks and know how important they are to our citizens and how important they are to our neighborhoods. So this is just to ensure that BUILD is continuing to be engaged as an important stakeholder as these plans get developed. Next slide. Policy 104, basically this is a reworking of policy 15. This is the policy that I spoke with you on Monday. We developed and proposed a policy to you that promoted efficient and cost-effective infrastructure growth. We discouraged skip developments. We promoted orderly growth in new areas, while also being alive to the pressures of the offsite levy by maximizing the infrastructure investment that's already been made. So our recommendation to this would be replaced with the wording that we've suggested. We think that this accomplishes and has been dealt with by dealing with policy 15. So that is it. Those are the policies that we have some comments for you today to consider.
Thank you very much for your submission. Next, we'll move on to Rachel Hopf. Have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, His Worship, Mayor Spearman, and members of council. As indicated, my name is Rachel Hoff. I'm legal counsel for Mr. Ted Schulten, who's asked me to speak today in respect to the housing portion of the proposed MDP. We appreciate the effort that has gone into this document so far. Our position today is there's still a long way to go for proper consultation and review of the supporting information for transparency. A primary concern is what appears to be a lack of clear definitions and communication of the housing types listed in the housing continuum. This is the point, for example, it's unclear policy 59, which uses the imperative language of ensure, would make any distinction between affordable housing and supportive housing. CMHC.
Just 1 second. Could I ask you to speak more directly into the microphone?
Yeah, sorry, the mask doesn't help. CMHC defines affordable housing as costing less than 30% of a household before tax income. It's a broad term and does not have to include subsidies. Supportive housing is a combination of housing and social services that can range greatly from assisting those who are homeless, to persons with brain injuries, to the elderly, to persons with substance abuse addictions. The supports needed for each need varies greatly, as do the potential impacts on the community. In other words, within supportive housing, there's a continuum. The MDP references a municipal housing strategy and implementation plan. It also references the results of a housing engagement. The MDP states from this housing engagement, quote, respondents believe it's important for the city to support all housing types suggested in the survey. In the context the statement is placed in the MDP, it seems to suggest that there was an informed response and knowledge of the continuum of housing by the respondents. Unless you specifically look at the survey, you would not know from the MDP that the engagement did not pull for feedback on shelters, transitional housing, or supportive housing that may encompass, for example, those with other issues. The survey focused on affordable housing for low-income residents, senior housing, housing units for individuals with disabilities, and multifamily development, including secondary suites. Further, a review of the report results show that 79% of respondents rated their familiarity with the implementation plan as only 1 or 2 out of 5. It's concerning that this survey is being relied on as a significant support for the housing continuum in this NBP. The Municipal Development Plan and Land Use Bylaw recommendations final report specifically concludes that prior to moving forward on making changes to the MDP and the Land Use Bylaw to support the implementation of the tools and regulations available to develop affordable housing and diversify housing form available, additional research and engagement is needed to ensure that they are local to the local context and appropriate high-level policies are in place. The municipal housing needs assessment in the MDP only included 2 stakeholders out of 75 that could be considered from the business community, and one of those represents the residential construction community, which is BUILD, who we've heard from. The concern is getting buy-in with such low engagement from that community that's also expected to improve the economic future of Lethbridge. As Mr. Kilgore stated in respect to Bill's concerns about targeting or just generally targeting districts for these kinds of housing, we can't just use supportive housing in every as a discretion use as all the same if we want to see successes. There's areas, for example, where supportive housing for seniors may be more appropriate, and others where supportive housing for those in recovery is more appropriate and supported by the area and community. We heard at the public hearing for 110 13th Street South many community members who were willing to see a planning group of numerous stakeholders, including social services, individual residents, small business, city planning, to review and plan appropriate places for those housing types. This is a document that's intended to cover 30 to 50 years from now. That will exceed the lifetime of many of us here today. We need to be prudent and careful of what we are binding the next 1 to 2 generations of residents to. As another example, Policy 60 uses the language of supporting potential options to convert existing motels and hotels. A concern raised to me from my client and some others is that this is related to a more acute circumstances as created by the COVID-19 pandemic and federal funding under the Federal Rapid Housing Initiative, rather than reflective of what the city is going to need for the next 5 decades. Again, just to summarize, this proposed MDP is a great start, or a good start, sorry, but the city and its residents and stakeholders need a great start. We encourage council to table this MDP, similar as to what Calgary City Council recently did in respect to their new community planning document after 3 days of public hearings. And we call on council to very carefully read not just the proposed MDP, but to carefully review all the references and supporting documents to ensure consistency and transparency. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your presentation. Now call upon Chulene Stiestol of the Downtown Business Improvement Area, Downtown BRZ, or designate. Please introduce yourself.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. I am not Tulene. I'm Justin Tavernini, the board chair for the Downtown BRZ.
Perfect.
I think she's a little bit shy today. I don't know what's going on. Anyways, first of all, thank you guys for having me tonight. And I also want to thank members of council and administration. Right now, the relationship between the BRZ and City Council is at an all-time high. So I thank you for that. I'd also like to thank the Lethbridge Police Service for their engagement in the downtown. They've been very present. They've been doing a wonderful job in our downtown community, as well as Mr. Andrew Malcolm. He has been a wonderful conduit for us as a BRZ to parlay what we need through the city. So big thanks you to Andrew Malcolm. We are here today to hold your feet to the fire a little bit, just a little bit, when it comes to zoning around housing in our downtown core, especially when it comes to transitional and supportive housing. We recognize that it is crucial to address the housing needs of Lethbridge, but at the same time, we need a clear direction that we can give to our business owners when they are, sorry guys, I lost my page. We need a clear direction to give to our business owners when they are investing in our downtown. Excluding the units at the View, downtown has 822 seniors units. Downtown has more than 373 affordable, supported housing units. There have currently been 7 hotel conversions to affordable housing in the downtown, which include Castle, Alec Arms, the Lethbridge Hotel, Coalbanks, Galt Manor, Tudor Manor, and Parkside. Plus, Helmrest and Hague are purpose-built social housing apartments. My point to this is that with such a small downtown core, is it wise to over-absorb the area with housing initiatives? Or Do we want to see the revitalization of our central retail and professional hub of the city of Lethbridge? Before we consider revising zoning around housing in the downtown and throughout the city of Lethbridge, we want to make it clear that the Downtown BRZ's board position, along with our nearly 600 members, feel that we need to focus our efforts on development for business and sustainability, which will in turn result in a vibrant and economically prosperous downtown. The BRZ is here to support business development, and entrepreneurship. This is our mandate and our purpose of existence. We are an organization funded by businesses of the downtown to support the businesses of downtown. In our opinion, the way to revitalize downtown is to ensure that the health, sustainability, and vibrancy of our downtown businesses are not further impacted by housing initiatives that would potentially push businesses outside of our downtown hub and reverse the good work, efforts, and energy the city of Lethbridge, the downtown BRZ, the heart of our city, and the business owners at large have done. We are asking you to pay particularly close attention to pages 120 through 124 of the MDP, which relates to housing and housing types throughout the city. We are asking, is the city in a place to make a clear decision on housing and rezoning initiatives considering the community wellness and safety strategy and next steps have not yet been determined? Any housing strategy set forth must align with the city's other master plans to truly be effective, including safety and transit. We want to make sure that there's a positive solution for everyone, citywide. A positive solution for the city would provide supports to get people on their feet, but would also protect businesses from the negative effects we've seen in the downtown in the past. This isn't just a downtown issue. We need strategies for the whole city of Lethbridge. We need a clear path forward, and outcomes of the NDP need to align with the CWSS action plan in regards to housing, housing strategies, and social issues. Thank you for your time. The Downtown BRZ is here to partner with the city of Lethbridge in connecting you with local businesses and their needs.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Perfectly timed. Okay, I'd now like to invite Ms. Kate Connolly of the London Road Neighbourhood Association to present. Welcome.
Thank you, and good evening to Mayor and Council and Administration. I'd first like to ask a question before I start. I have a page presentation on housing, which will be less than 5 minutes. I also have a short piece on community wellbeing and one on places. So should I run them all together now, or
yes,
how does it work?
You would, and the written submissions would be, if you leave the written submissions, so that'll give you the freedom to skim and hit the highlights if you don't think you've got enough time to do all three.
Okay, I'll forge ahead. Let me know when the buzzer starts. I'd first like to congratulate the planners for this very comprehensive plan. A great deal of work has gone into it and a lot of consultation, so I think they're to be applauded for that. So first, housing. London Road welcomes the plan's intention to spread population density more equitably throughout the city. I noticed that in the MDP review from last year, 7 out of 10 respondents supported allowing, for instance, secondary suites in any residential districts, but I believe these are currently prohibited in certain areas. For many decades, London Road, along with other neighbourhoods in the core category and a few on the west side, have borne the weight of denser housing development. We are one of the most diverse housing areas, with multifamily housing, secondary suites, single-room housing, and new infills adding to our existing single-family and duplex homes. Much as I respect Ross, his mention of London Road population decrease since 1950s is slightly misleading. we still have among the very highest population density of 30 to 40 units per hectare, even higher than the core average of 26 units, and far, far higher than some other neighborhoods that average 4.5 to 10 units per hectare. Even the benchmark proposal of minimum density of 27.5 for future new neighborhoods is still well below our present average density. So yes, we do feel that it is time for housing density to be shared out around all of the city's neighborhoods. Of course, this drive towards increased density and full range of housing should always include full consultation with all local residents and neighborhood associations, and should respect the existing built form and character. We agree with the proposal on page 117 for the creation of well-connected neighborhoods by strengthening city relationship building with established and new neighborhood associations. Residents in all areas of the city should be more closely consulted about infill projects. In London Road and other neighborhoods, far too little attention is paid to the impact of the huge scale of some of these infills in relation to their immediate neighbors, with many smaller, older homes being dwarfed and overshadowed by such developments to the extent that their backyards lose their sunlight. Ross mentioned a worldwide trend towards smaller homes, but this certainly does not occur in London Road. We spent several years working with the city to produce our new area redevelopment plan. It is not perfect, but it does provide us with some protections in regard to, e.g., greatly curtailing new front driveways and helping protect our beloved trees. But we have serious concerns that this new municipal development plan could overrule and supersede our ARP. I note in passing that the Calgary Guidebook, which has caused such uproar in Calgary Council public meetings in the last week, has been sent back for further changes and consultations and has had its statutory label removed. Just of interest, I'm not saying that should be done here. A final point on housing. In London Road, we would like to see our heritage homes protected. They are a unique part of Lethbridge's history and character. Moving along to community well-being, I've got three main points here. First, safety. The quote is on page 111, "Safety is a primary consideration of all Lethbridge residents, whether on the road, walking through public places, or in their homes." Safety is a major concern for London Road residents, perhaps even more so than in many other neighbourhoods. CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design, the modifying of these design elements to reduce the opportunity for crime-related behaviours, is a good idea on a civic public level, but has also had to be enacted on a personal resident level in order to discourage the large increase in property crime over the past few years in our neighbourhood. Examples provided to us by the Office of the Police Chief compared 2019 with 2020 figures. Theft over and above went up by 50% in less than a year, theft from vehicles up by 25%, and Provincial Trespass Act reports up from 0 to 36, partly accounted for, no doubt, by most people being confined to their homes during COVID. But London Road residents have had to respond by building higher fences, extra locks and padlocks, and by installing security lights. On a more positive note, parks and green space, Policy 42, to ensure equitable access to parks and opportunities for walking, biking, hiking, and gardening. London Road residents would wholeheartedly agree with these policies. The 7th Avenue development has been a brilliant project. I walk it every day, and it is wonderful to see the numbers of people of all ages using the avenue for walks and bike rides. Thank you to the enlightened planners who made this possible. As for parks, we treasure the parks in our area, perhaps more especially because we, like other core neighbourhoods, have so little green space in comparison to newer neighbourhoods. Recreation sports policy 43. Ensure facilities meet the needs of current and future generations. Provide opportunities for conversion of city-owned facilities to meet future recreational needs. London Road residents were shocked and saddened by the loss of the Civic Square YMCA, which was in constant use by local families and downtown workers. We really hope that Policy 43 will provide for the return of a recreational facility within the redeveloped Civic Square. Finally, places. In London Road, we truly value and love our, quote, beloved street trees, page 132 of the plan, and agree that they are, quote, a priceless inheritance passed down to today's residents by past generations. And yes, they do need to be carefully protected, as does our beautiful river valley. As for the downtown, London Road residents appreciate and visit the downtown probably more than all other city residents. They walk and cycle there to shop, eat, and attend plays, festivals, and other cultural events. We support the continued revitalization of downtown and the moves to increase residential living in the downtown core. Thank you very much. I made it, did I? Good.
We gave you a little leniency.
Well, thank you, because I had the two extra
We gave you
ones.
about 2 minutes.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next is Barry Markardson. Welcome.
Mayor Spearman, members of the City Council, and members of the administration, and members of the Planning Department, thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and thank you so much to the planners, to Ross, Genesis, Tyson, and Sheila for being available to so readily answer my questions and teach me about this important document. My family has lived in or near Lethbridge for over 120 years. I was born in Lethbridge and have lived here all of my life. I'm committed to Lethbridge, to good long-term planning, and I'm very protective of our quality of life. I've been in the real estate investment business in Lethbridge for over 35 years. The voting citizens of Lethbridge have communicated loud and clear their opposition to random direct control rezoning for transitional, supportive, shelter housing in their neighborhoods. The evidence for this includes A, the Ramada Inn rezoning proposal. Over 6,000 citizens signed a petition of opposition, and over 20 businesses and commercial property owners oppose this rezoning. B, the 110 13th Street South rezoning proposal. Over 70 homeowners, business owners, and property owners sent letters of opposition. In addition, City Council voted 7-2 against that rezoning proposal. C, Lethbridge Downtown Business Revitalization Zone area opposition to transitional supportive housing is overwhelming. Opposition includes 1, the Downtown BRZ, which represents over 500 downtown businesses. 2, the boards of directors of 3 downtown retirement condominium home buildings representing over 400 homeowners and having a value of approximately $140 million. 3, over 300 downtown retirement building homeowners who have signed a petition of opposition. 4, property owners representing over 150 downtown business revitalization area businesses and having a property value of approximately $100 million. As stated, there is overwhelming opposition to random direct control rezoning for transitional supportive shelter housing. This is especially the case for the conversion of hotels and motels for that purpose. Homeowners, business owners, and property owners have made investments based upon the allowed current land uses. This commitment and investment has been based upon the integrity of the City of Lethbridge's commitment to the current zoning rules and a commitment to complementary land uses. It would be unfair to change the rules now. Policy number 60 would change these rules. It would impact neighborhood safety, quality of life, and property values. Therefore, I request as follows. On page 124 of the NDP, under Affordable, Accessible, and Supportive Housing, Policy 60, which I've attached to my letter, I respectfully request that Policy 60 be deleted in its entirety. If that request is not acceptable to City Council, then I request that City Council adjust the wording of Policy 60 as follows. Delete the bracketed words, including, but not limited to, supportive or affordable housing, and replace them with the words limited to permanent affordable housing and market rental housing. Thank you for your consideration and your time. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your presentation. Okay, are there any other members of the public that wish to make a presentation at this time? Is there anybody online that wishes to make a presentation at this time? Okay, for a third and final time, is there any other member of the public that wishes to make a presentation at this time? Hearing no other presenters, it is now time for City Council to ask questions of any of the presenters. We'll start with Deputy Mayor Miyashiro.
Thank you very much, Mayor Spearman. I have a number of questions, so kick me off whenever you feel it necessary. First question is for Ms. Gehring. Ms. Gehring, in the hierarchy of planning in the city of Lethbridge, where does the municipal development plan sit?
So the municipal development plan is actually second. After the intermunicipal development plan, we have of Lethbridge County. So all other plans fall underneath it.
Thank you. So the worry that if they don't like this one, that every other plan will change, is that a correct assumption?
So Councillor Miyashiro, we're not going to go back into approved area structure plans or area redevelopment plans and make changes at this point, no.
Great, thank you. Ms. Connolly, if you're still there.
Please come to the microphone.
Yes.
Yes, thank you for taking the time to come and present to us. I have two questions. In the London Road area redevelopment plan, was there not a section on restricting the blockage of sunlight into people's yards?
No, unfortunately. We requested it, but that only applies to multifamily dwellings, to, I believe it's, I don't have it in front of me, a fourplex and larger, or something over so many stories. It does not apply to individual single-family houses which can tower above neighboring homes. Thank you.
But if you're over, I think it was 2 stories, there had to be considerations. Isn't that not correct?
Not for a single-family home, I believe.
Okay, thank you. And you know that there is a large recreational facility already in the Civic Commons, despite the fact that the YMCA was torn down?
You're talking about what, the swimming pool and the seniors'
Absolutely.
facilities?
58,000 square, LSU is 58,000
Well,
square feet.
you would know that better than anyone, and we really appreciate having that in the area. But we're talking about a recreation facility for all ages, and not necessarily including a swimming pool, but something more like the YMCA that we so sadly lost. Great. Although, interestingly, in the conversations and the roundtable that we had a few years ago, you may have attended that, on the future possibilities for the Civic Square, many plans were put forward, and one of these was for a joint recreation new seniors facility with one at one end and one at the other, and a swimming pool in the middle. So I don't know if that will ever come to fruition, but it was very interesting to hear about it.
Right. It takes money.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much, Ms.
Thank
Conley.
you.
Appreciate that. Mr. Cavernini, if you're still around.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I was a bit perplexed by a couple of things you said. I just want you to clarify a bit. So in most municipalities of any size, especially larger ones, the goal is to have higher densification of residential buildings so that they can actually work, live, and play in the same area. What you're suggesting, if I heard you correctly, was why focus on residential when we want to grow business and services? So is your belief that if there's more people living there, they can't take advantage of the stores and restaurants and maybe help drive more business to the downtown area?
No, not at all. Our focus is permanent housing. So like condominiums in the downtown, taxpayers, and to shy away from transitional, supportive, and affordable housing initiatives that could actually hinder business.
But affordable housing doesn't mean that they're poor. You
No,
understand?
no, absolutely not.
Okay. So and they can still buy things downtown, not just rich people.
True.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's all. Thank you.
Move on to Councillor Kaufman.
Well, you want to move on? Okay, because I have a couple more. Thank you. I'll
Okay,
step
we'll
out.
put you back in the queue. Yeah.
Okay.
Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Ms. Gehring, during the presentation from Ms. Connolly, she made reference to something that Mr. Kilgore had identified. She challenged the validity of his statement. I'm just wondering if Mr. Kilgore wants an opportunity to clarify what it was that he stated.
Sure, absolutely. Ross, I believe you're on the line. And Councillor Kaufman, if you could perhaps be a bit clear about which particular statement it was.
The one where she started the sentence with, "I like Ross."
Oh, okay, sure.
Yes, yes, yeah.
I'm trying to remember myself. Was that the one about the density of the neighborhood?
Yes, the density since the 1950s, I think, has declined. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah. Yeah, so that's what we identified through the London Road Area Redevelopment Plan in terms of the population change since it peaked in the 1950s. It's fallen about 30%. She's absolutely right. The London Road's current density, or at least in 2016 when we last did every neighbourhood in the city, it's 34.8 units per hectare density. So to put that in context, that makes it, I believe, the third densest residential neighbourhood. The Upper East Side, also known as Hamilton or the Warehouse District, is 42.8 and Redwood is 35.2. Important to note that here we consider medium density to be 37 to 75. So London Road is still in what we'd call a low density range. Does that cover what she was asking?
It does. It certainly does for me. I understand the context behind it now. Thank you. Ms. Gehring, there seems to be, in my mind, there seems to be a bit of a policy conflict between policy 94 and policy 134. And I have to scroll in my document here for both of them as well. And while you're flipping pages as well, policy 94 states that we ensure commercial areas are accessible via active transportation by requiring new commercial developments to provide safe, barrier-free access for people walking, rolling, or cycling, and reviewing regulations and relevant statutory plans to ensure they encourage or require new commercial buildings to provide building frontage on and main building entrance directly from the sidewalk. Excellent policy. Quite supportive of 94, but 134, we had this conversation yesterday, was about just at support. It wasn't promote, it wasn't ensure, and it was about barrier-free access. I see a direct correlation between the two, and especially if we're requiring commercial areas to be accessible. I get, again, it's the conversation about privately owned dwellings. We have capacity, perhaps through development plans and whatnot, to ensure commercial areas are accessible. But again, it's about this accessibility, barrier-free access on the issues of mobility and accessibility. Can you help me navigate the disconnect, or at least in my mind, the disconnect?
Sure, thank you, Councillor Kaufman. So for policy 94, we're looking at outside of the commercial areas. So the connection between the private and the public spaces, right?
Yes.
And then for 134, that's inside the buildings. For universal design principles, also would look at inside buildings. So that's why it's a support, because buildings are private. And the building code only goes so far in that regard.
Okay.
So I don't think they're disconnected. They do refer to separate. One is like inside the buildings, the other is outside, connecting them with other buildings. So if you need more clarity on that, that would certainly be something that we could look at in terms of the wording of the policies.
No, I'll keep finding other ways of coming back to 134. Thank you. Policy 114. I note C on 114, establishing alternative off-street parking requirements for affordable and supportive housing developments. And then we've got two actual very specific statements in there. These seem counterintuitive if we're looking at a more higher level document, and then we actually have codification of within 100 meters of an arterial road or within 750 of a range of land uses and services considered likely to meet most residents' daily needs. Why are we putting in something incredibly specific in this particular policy?
That is a good question as well, Councillor Kaufman. I think some of that comes actually out of the mobility and accessibility master plan too. And so I think it's because we had this information before us. We didn't need to do further research on it or review on it that it was included. Certainly if you think that may change in the future, maybe it is too specific to include in a longer range document. That is something that we could look at taking out and perhaps just including in terms of the land use bylaw in our parking design guideline section.
Okay, it strikes me, again, I'm just one of 9, it strikes me as unusual that we would have such specifics in such a high level document, whereas I thought it would actually be elsewhere, but that's fine.
No, that's point taken for sure.
Okay, thank you. Final question on this round. What's the objective outcome of policies 38 and 40?
So I'll speak perhaps about 38. I think there's an opportunity for city employees to actually not only be good role models, but educators as well, in terms of their interactions in the public, their interactions with other groups, such as our Indigenous population, and opportunities for other residents to learn from that. So that I think is one of the things we looked at. It's also one of the recommendations coming from some of Pamela and Perry's work in terms of the Indigenous Relations Office. And in terms of number 40, so that has to do with placemaking is all about the experience and the feelings people have associated when they're in a place. Using things such as wayfinding and signage, cultural elements in terms of landscaping types or furniture allows groups such as our Indigenous population to feel that they belong here, to feel that these spaces are actually designed for them as well. And so that's what we're looking at in terms of 40. And I'll let Ms. Javio-Orio also weigh in.
Yeah, so like Maureen said, the first one is inward looking. So what can the city administration do to make the city more inclusive? And that's exactly what Ms. Gehring said, to equip its employees to be a role model for people that they're interacting with as they're providing a service, or when other organizations are looking at what to do to make their employees have the tools to be more inclusive and bring that to their customer service. the policy 40 looks at how can we create an environment in our public places to make sure that both people who don't belong to a marginalized group and people who do have the ability to share the space and just build understanding about what their different struggles are. Placemaking is something that's not quite tangible, but one tool is public art. And one example that I think many of us may have been exposed to over the past, I want to say 2 or 3 years, was a project, it was a billboard and bus wrapping project that displayed 2 images of the same person. On the right-hand side, you had negative stereotypes about that Indigenous person being photographed. And on the right side, you had the actual roles that they fulfilled, like they were sisters, parents, art athletes, or teachers, really things that people don't look at because there are so many stereotypes about Indigenous people that our community does experience and have. And so that is a placemaking tool in that we were putting Indigenous people at the forefront and dispelling stereotypes that they experience. And through that conversation, difficult conversations were started, and we challenged the stereotypes that often are easier to accept than to challenge. And so that is the purpose of Policy 40. And of course, it's not a policy that will be implemented on its own. It will be supported by other policies in the arts, culture, and heritage, as well as places policies. But many of them do have that reconciliation lens, and they do strive to create the city more inclusive.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Spearman. I've got other questions. I'll step out. Thank you.
Okay, we'll put you in the queue. Councillor Carlson?
Thank you, Mayor Spearman, and thank you to everyone who's provided information and worked on the plan and presented today. Much appreciated. Ms. Gehring, Policy 48. It talks about supporting the availability of healthy and accessible food options, etc. It's only support, so fairly weak in my mind. And B, it seems fairly outward facing, partnering with outside groups and organizations. Was there any consideration given to things we could do as a city, such as like requiring either ourselves or developers to provide a community garden space, to provide edible orchards, to provide those types of features in neighborhoods, rather than always having to try and find a way to fit them in after the fact? Was there any thought given to that?
So that's a good question, Councillor Carlson. Actually, Ms. Havia Oreo did participate in a group that looked at a community garden strategy. They had numerous discussions, both internal and external, in terms of how we could make things like community gardens, and certainly community gardens are not the only option in this particular case. And I'm not sure, Genesis, I think you might be able to answer Councillor Carlson's question.
Yeah, so that is, you're right, it is outward facing because that's the approach that we currently have in partnership with Environment Lethbridge. And so that service delivery is delivered by them, and for that reason, we don't have the jurisdiction to ensure it. However, Policy 78 does speak to healthy neighborhoods, and healthy neighborhoods encompasses social interaction and, of course, placemaking. And so one of the components of it is food security. And so it does require that community gardens are part of that land use that is considered for parks. We also have Policy 79 that speaks to a community garden strategy. So it is support, but we are hopeful that we can get to a higher level. If you would like to, we could definitely change this to a higher level. Promote. This policy is one that we are sort of temperature checking. If council would like to level it up, we can also change the wording to make sure it fits under the promote intent level.
Thank you. And I do appreciate that 77 and 78, I think it's 77, 78, or maybe 78, 79, both do speak to that as well. In our research, were there any other communities that we look at or have contact with that actually embed these in? Because it is always hard to shoehorn things in after the fact, find the proper space, and then have to dig up irrigation, et cetera, et cetera. Any communities require this? I know that there are some forward-thinking jurisdictions in the States, maybe in Vancouver, that require edible plantings rather than the ornamental. I live near the green strip where it's all ornamental crab apples. They're almost useless except for destroying the pathway system. And it'd be much nicer to have full apples. So I'm just wondering, do we know of any communities that are more progressive on these?
So, Councillor Carlson, we didn't research that specifically. It would be interesting to find out from Build as well, whether from the development industry's perspective, any developers are using this in terms of marketing for their neighborhoods or developments. In terms of our own orchards, we do have several edible orchards in the city as well. Chris Witowski from our Parks Department is just weighing in that he's not aware of any cities that have this requirement, and we would have to consult with Build in terms of what that would look like.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor Spearman.
Okay, Councillor Crowson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. I want to continue a conversation we were sort of having the other day, Ms. Gearing, about the 4 types of neighborhoods and wondering if we have the appropriate type of planning tools for those neighborhoods. Certainly with our core neighborhoods, the area redevelopment plans work well. We have the outline plans for the emerging neighborhoods. In the mature neighborhoods, what type of plan, when we get around to having to plan those, because I know we still have some core neighborhoods to do, but what type of plan do we see as effective there, and do we have the right planning mechanism for those neighborhoods?
So thank you, Councillor Crowson. In the Municipal Government Act, we are really limited in terms of the planning options that are available to us. So when we would finish up with our core neighborhoods in terms of area redevelopment plans, we would be looking at a similar, so that's the only way really to have that statutory impact, and also where the rules and regulations need to be required to, be complied with. I'm not sure if Mr. Lowen would have anything else to add, but we would be looking at doing area redevelopment plans in time for the mature neighborhoods as well.
Okay. I don't,
okay.
Doesn't look like Mr. Lowen's coming to come on. Oh.
Nope, he's not commenting, so yeah.
All right, we'll go on to my, hello, Mr. Lowen.
Just, I have nothing in specific to add, but I'm available if there's a question.
Okay. Now, I was just wondering, because when we get to the mature neighborhoods and their redevelopments, the first time we're getting into neighborhoods designed completely around cars rather than the core neighborhoods which have the older design. So I was just curious how we would be handling them as we go forward, because that will be coming. One of the things we heard from Build, Ms. Gehring, is about density and about, the 27.5 dwelling units and how it should be played out. First question related to that is, do other communities have in their MDPs density guidelines or density standards? Is this something that you would see if you looked at an MDP of another community?
Yes, Councillor Crowson, it's not unusual for a municipality to have a density target. I would like to just clarify a couple of things. So the 27.5 units per net hectare applies to outline plans adopted after this municipal development plan. So just to make sure that is communicated. It doesn't prevent an outline plan from being amended, just that the density not be lowered. We did do extensive consultation with Build when we did the efficient land use strategy. And we actually did have some higher numbers in mind as targets at that time. So we were up around 29 units per hectare. We were asked by Build to lower that. So we went through and we did a bit of a survey of what our outline plans were coming in at anyway. And 27.5, all of our outline plans do meet that. So it's not exactly a stretch target. It is actually a maintenance target at this point.
Okay, good to know. And on 65, we're talking infill, policy 65. We have infill infrastructure standards and or guidelines. Can you walk me through what you mean on that? Because of course, as we heard from Ms. Connolly, and we would hear from a lot of the core neighborhoods, the type of infill, does it have to be neighborhood specific? Are we going to have different guidelines for different communities? What are we looking at there? Because right now it seems quite broad, and I'm just curious how it would play out.
So Councillor Croson, so it is policy 65 then?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the reasons we wanted to put this policy into the plan was actually to give like a framework around what sorts of things we would be looking at and discussing with an area redevelopment plan. We've always taken the position here at the city that each neighborhood is different. We don't have a formula for how a neighborhood should develop. Something like that guidebook that Calgary came up with, I think they have 240 area redevelopment plans they have to do. So certainly that amount is overwhelming for staff, and I can understand why they'd want to get some type of formula or template going. But we have never taken that approach. We've always approached each neighborhood, whether it's Staffordville, whether it's Westminster, whether it's London Road, whether it's around the hospitals, very individually. And we will continue to do that. But we did wanted to put in the MDP the things that we would be looking at and the things that we thought were critical to have addressed.
So the purpose intent is to have infill that is neighborhood specific, but to give some guidelines in the MDP just so people aren't surprised when that discussion happens.
It is, and also to allow a bit of comparability. So in terms of that, we're not talking apples to oranges, but maybe just types of apples, if that makes sense.
Thank you very much. I will step out right now, Mayor Spearman. Thank you.
Thank you. Acting Mayor Higgin.
Thank you, Mayor Chairman. Sorry, my question has already been asked. I apologize. I'll lower my hand.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Miyashiro.
Thanks, Mayor Spearman. Is Ms. Murn still with us?
You can ask her question and see if she answers.
Hi, I am.
Yeah, I'd prefer to wait till the question, to wait till know if she's here before I ask the question.
Go ahead.
Bridget, thank you very much. You referenced, I think it was policy 64, and you said that it dictates the size and shape of a unit in a multi-family. I might have missed that in taking notes what you're saying. Did you actually say that policy 64 dictates the size and shape of a dwelling?
No, not of a dwelling.
Oh, okay.
No, just how they plan an area. That if, you know what, I can see why you thought that. I was talking about density targets and if the density could be absorbed.
Right. Okay,
so
sorry, no, I
can't absorb that certain density.
No, I did want clarification, but thank you for clarifying that. And that's it for you. Thank you. Ms. Gehring, a couple places you guys refer to age-friendly and aging in place. And is this, some of this information is found in the age-friendly strategic plan that City Lethbridge has developed in the last few years, as well as some things from Alberta Health Services. When you pull that together, because aging, I don't want to lecture, but aging in place isn't just where you live, it's the supports you have and how you live. In promoting and encouraging this housing that you talked about in 61, I guess my question is, are you aware that that's not just going to help people age in place by the location of their residence and the size of it, I guess?
So we did, Councillor Miyashiro, understand that of course it is much broader in scope as a topic than what we have here. However, we felt that was something we could extract from that and actually put to good use in the MDP in terms of the outcome, and we could measure it. So that's why we only took a portion of that.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay,
thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Ms. Gehring, just back to policy 64 for clarification, if we could please. On the second bullet, the one that starts disallowing, amendments to outline plans are still available. You just, by this policy, it's saying that you could not lower the net residential density across the plan area. So if there's, so if there's a requirement for an amendment to the outline plan, it's possible, you just can't lower the net residential density.
Yes, Councillor Coffin, we've had a couple of amendments to outline plans where they've traded the density. So for instance, they have traded one type of density for another type of density, which would be perfectly fine as long as you're still meeting that net overall. So that's still available in terms of the changes to the market and things that might be happening in terms of who the developer is dealing with for a particular site.
Okay, could the language be clarified? Because the way it reads, you do have to read the second part, which says which lowers the net of residential density across the plan area. But is there possibility of just clarifying that a little bit to what you said? It makes sense after you've explained it now.
We could certainly change the second point to be a little bit more clear. That's not a problem as well.
I think that'd be appreciated. And just for my clarification, net residential density is not the same as the minimum average density, correct?
That's true. Whenever an outline plan is done, the engineering consultant does provide those figures to us in terms of how they see the lots being subdivided and the types of dwellings or development they see on them.
So you can change the net residential density, but you can still achieve the minimum average density.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. On policy 69, did we? I'm sorry, I've been trying for some time to understand exactly what 69 is trying to get at. I recognize that there's this desire to build diversity within multifamily, basically, by not having one unit or one apartment building, for example, that only has one bedroom units. You're looking for multiple sizes and number of bedrooms in the same unit. Is that what you're looking for?
So Councillor Kaufman, this suggestion comes directly out of the municipal housing strategy in terms of ensuring that we do have buildings that support a variety of demographics. So having bachelor suites, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 3 bedrooms. We did a bit of a survey. We've had quite a bit of multifamily constructed over the past 3 or 4 years, and we are getting a range anyway of the 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. It's perhaps the bachelor suites that we aren't seeing as much of, but this particular policy would look to encourage a variety of demographics within one building.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the clarification on that. And then to the point that several people have raised about policy 60, the suggestion was made to remove what's in parentheses, including but not limited to supportive or affordable housing. I don't believe changes the intent or the spirit of the statement, but maybe I'm missing something.
So Councillor Kaufman, I think perhaps there is a bit of an overall theme happening in terms of the use of the terminology and the housing continuum. This particular policy actually came out of the commercial and industrial study that was done that suggested we had a high hotel vacancy rate and more hotel rooms per capita than similar sized cities. It actually foresaw that this would likely mean some of our older hotels would be at a bit of a tipping point in terms of whether there would be reinvestment in them or whether they would be looking for some type of adaptive reuse. And so that's where that particular policy came from. It's also, I believe, suggested in the municipal housing strategy, and a number of municipalities across Canada have been utilizing older hotels for this purpose because they're easy to retrofit. It's not like retrofitting a commercial building for housing. It's actually a lot easier in that manner. So if you're looking for clarity on the wording, that is something we can do as well. It's difficult for us in terms of who lives in the building. So the land use bylaw likes to, we regulate building type, and we regulate activity. So for instance, we wouldn't necessarily say this is a supportive housing project for a disabled person versus someone who's a senior citizen versus someone who's in low income. We would say that supportive housing is based on supports that are available for residents, regardless of who the resident is. And that's in contrast to a apartment building. We wouldn't say this is a low income apartment building or a high end apartment building. It is simply an apartment building. So I'm not sure if we want to have some more discussion on policy 60. It has come up from a couple of different speakers. But just to give you some context around why it's in the document and some of the considerations that we deal with as planners and also on the development end of the department in how we look at approving residential use.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I really appreciate that clarification. That does help. There does seem to be some uncertainty in the community. I'm wondering if verbiage is required somewhere in the document to identify the continuum, to identify some of these things. But that statement as well is, yes, we are actually about regulating, as you say, the apartment, not who lives in the apartment. And that's actually, I think, an incredible statement to make at some point. So I'll just maybe leave that with you. And if you and I need to touch base later on that, certainly I'd make myself available for that. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Spearman.
Okay. Councillor Crowson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. All right, Ms. Gearing, let's go to number 67. Reviewing the regulatory and statutory environment related to ensuring range and type of residential development in the downtown. You have there, one of the things is ensuring minimum parking requirements are not an obstacle to residential development of or adaptive reuse. One of the questions that I would have is, could we not just ensure minimum parking requirements are not an issue anywhere in the city?
So that's interesting, Councillor Crowson. We have actually had two engagements so far with Chamber of Commerce in regards to parking requirements. We have had some engagement with our transportation department. We're looking at actually changes for the land use bylaw in terms of parking in a couple of geographic areas. And so I guess our approach is to try something out with a pilot in terms of downtown and perhaps the warehouse district and see where we go. Understand what some of the implications may be. One of the things we are cognizant of is spillover traffic to residential areas. So that because commercial districts are often adjacent to residential, that may be an unintended consequence that we want to understand first, I think, before we as staff would actually promote in going something as far as in the entire city. But I appreciate your point. If you wanted to suggest any changes there that we explore it more, we would certainly, be open to that too.
So we could look at something, a policy about explore getting rid of, I'm not going to be wordsmithing, but getting rid of minimum parking requirements as a pilot in some part of the community. Something like that is something that we could see as a policy type. Excellent. Yeah. When Ms. Connolly spoke, she talked about, protecting the heritage homes. And certainly we have several core neighborhoods that have heritage homes. And I don't know if it's under the MDP or it may tie in with our heritage plan, but have we looked at heritage districts? Have we actually considered them rather than designating individually? Have we looked at all heritage districts?
So not so far, Councillor Crowson. That would be something that we would have to understand the legality behind. Heritage districts, I know in the United States, are used quite extensively in terms of actually having boards who overview drawings and changes. Actually, they act as almost a preliminary approval before the city gives approval. I'm not sure of the regulatory framework here in Canada or in Alberta for a historic district and what that would mean for private property rights here. So that would be something we'd have to look at.
So it may have to be an investigate, look into, etc. Because you're right, it's something that Canada's a little bit behind on the Americans on working on that area, most definitely.
Yeah, we are looking at the cultural landscape aspect in the new Heritage Master Plan, I'm not sure. We might be able to delve a little bit deeper in terms of best practices within the scope of that project as well.
Certainly, that's something I would love to see. My next question, and then I'll step out. It's a small question. Ms. Gearing, can we just get rid of zoning entirely? I'm kidding, don't worry.
Well, that's okay. The province requires you to have a land use bylaw, but it doesn't require you to have a certain number of districts. So I think
it is.
It's
one of the things you and I have talked about is decreasing them. Yeah. Is that something that has been seriously looked at? Because zoning is a weird hammer to try to fix some of the problems we're trying to fix. And yet it often becomes a land use zoning issue rather than the real issue. So have we at any time seriously thought of, let's just have a real discussion about what zoning is supposed to be and why we have it? And is the MDP a place we should look at that policy?
So that's interesting. We are really stretching tonight. This is kind of great as a planner to have these discussions.
She wants anarchy. That's what she's saying.
So Ms. Graham.
No, we could do it in a better way. I'm not talking anarchy. I am talking a different tool than zoning and a more appropriate tool.
Yeah, so Ms. Graham alluded a bit to why zoning happened in the first place in terms of health impacts, right? So making sure that those industrial uses did stay away from the residential uses. And I think now we've got some performance standards, we've got regulations in place where it's not quite an issue, but I think for people's perceptions, they still expect that some uses will be separated from residential ones. I think that is an expectation amongst our residents. We are looking actually at, as part of our land use bylaw phase 2, diminishing the amount of commercial districts that we have, so trying to consolidate some of those. Also our industrial districts perhaps. And again, our residential land use bylaw changes for phase 3. There are some districts there that are old, that are pretty much defunct at this point. And so we have to understand what that means to retire those districts. But that is something we are looking at. It's getting a bit unwieldy. I think the RLF district that council approved was a bit of a if you were starting from scratch in a new community somewhere, a new town, that would be something that would be interesting to try, because that is more of a melding between sort of a low intensity commercial and residential type zoning. I'm not sure how that would work introducing it now into our built environment. It is recommended in the land use bylaw for new communities. I do see some use for it in actually our older areas as well. The idea, because it's in our older areas where you do see that small neighborhood street fronting commercial that we don't get necessarily in the new areas unless we're very purposeful and thoughtful about it. So.
Right, and we heard yesterday from the London Road representative, right? Or was it the other day? Sorry, all these days are running together. No, actually, that was Dr. McLaughlin, about the need to keep that kind of commercial in those communities. And of course, London Road sees the benefit, but trying to create that in a new community is almost impossible because of the rules we have in place.
It's different in a new community, I think, because of the nature of how commercial has been. So I think it's important to understand that some of our neighborhoods, so for instance, Riverstone was started in 1999, and we're just getting to the final phases of that, and that's 20 years. So I mean, a lot can change in 20 years in terms of what is thought of as this is the way retail functions now, but by the time it gets 20 years later, perhaps there has been some changes, right? But yet you haven't actually accounted for them with the design of the actual commercial site. So the difference between leasing and owning, I hope we can get back into a resurgence of owning. Certainly the Royal View ASP, the Southeast ASP do allow for those sorts of things with street fronting retail and perhaps more opportunity for small business to occur in the newer areas. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, a conversation I'd like to have more of. I will probably be emailing you some ideas, but yes, if we could have a little bit of fewer zones, I think we could move some things along. I will step out right now. Thank you, Mayor Spearman.
Thank you. Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Just for clarification, is Ms. Hopp still there? And all I need is a nod from her. She did a presentation representing Mr. Scholten. I'm just wondering if her statements are from the documents that are included in her package today, or if these were aside from those statements.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Kaufman. I believe there were some that were in the statement or the written submission that Mr. Scholten did provide. However, some were additional based on some conversations with him this week. I understand that Mr. Scholten will also be speaking tomorrow, which may focus a little bit more on what he's already provided.
Okay, I'm just wondering if there was something additional added today, if that could be submitted to the clerk as well. And if Mr. Scholten wants to do that tomorrow, that's fine too.
Sure, and
everything captured.
I can speak to him later, and if he needs to provide any clarification tomorrow, I'll ask him to do that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Gehring, yeah, thank you very much. Ms. Gehring, just back to policy 64 again. And I meant to do this after we spoke, ask Ms. Mearns just to make sure I was being clear in what it was that she had said and presented. So when we had talked about, is Ms. Mearns still there?
I believe she's just muted.
Hi.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. Just want to make sure we're still there. Thank you. So we had talked about policy 64. We talked about disallowing amendments to outline plans which lower the net residential density. Ms. Gehring stated that net density was swappable. Did I use any of the right terms there? Okay.
That's
good.
Correct.
Okay. Just wanted to check in. Is that what you were addressing in your presentation, Ms. Mearns, or did I miss the point on something?
Thank you for the question. Just to clarify, when I said that outline plans couldn't be amended, I meant specifically those outline plans that were less than that 27.5. So we appreciate and recognize that that means that 27.5, but it's still restrictive. There needs to be some opportunity. That's an average. It just seems to be incredibly arbitrary and restrictive. But if you don't mind, I will pass that question on to Perry, who's better, as our developer expert, better knowledgeable to answer that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Neufeld?
Hello. Yeah. Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Your Worship and Council. I think from a bigger picture perspective, it's good to ensure density. I think the marketplace has responded to the variety requested by the marketplace and has achieved increasing densities over time and will continue to do so if that's what the market is requesting. I do think it is important, though, to be in this document more flexible in a way that you encourage and support and help facilitate the proper and appropriate housing forms in the proper locations, and not be overly prescriptive in policy at this level, which would allow, for instance, if there was a case where you had to, let's say, move from an R75 zoning to an R37 zoning, you wouldn't be hamstringing yourself and the entire community with a vacant parcel, perhaps, if there was just a little bit of lighter density kind of being requested, which would still give you a variety of housing. So I think it's important to make sure that when you're looking at density, you're also not only focusing on density, but you're looking at housing mix, you're looking at layout and design, and you're looking at a number of things all at the same time. And that's why I would say that the industry is requesting a little more flexible approach in that area.
Thank you. Is the flexible approach, don't wait, please. Is the flexible approach on the 27.5? Is the flexible approach on something else in particular?
I think the flexible approach would be more on potentially setting putting together a policy that looks at it a little bit more holistically and perhaps setting a goal and striving for that goal, but where perhaps that minimum might be unachievable, that that council could still entertain applications to help investors move forward with developing their properties with appropriate forms of housing that the community is requesting. So I would say just some form of flexibility in the policy. When you say ensure, that means that if there's anything even slightly below proposed, that it's not even something where a developer or a builder or an investor could bring forward a land use amendment application for something that very may well fit and be suitable in that community, right? So that's kind of what we're looking for. If you'd like us to take it back and take a look at it a little closer, we would be happy to do that, and then perhaps come back with a suggested either number or some suggestions in revised wording to the policy or that area of the document.
Options are always better than all or nothing. So if you're wanting to do that, I would certainly encourage that. Thank you. Ms. Gehring, just for clarification, to achieve a minimum average density, you can have a minimum or you can have an average. I'm struggling to see when you could have a minimum average.
So that's a good point with semantics, Councillor Coffin, and perhaps we will adjust the wording there. Yeah, you're right. It is a little bit hard to explain what that would look like. So I think perhaps we would just go with the net residential density instead of a minimum average. That's a good point.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think Mr. Kilgore wanted to comment.
No, actually, that's okay.
Okay. Councillor Crowson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Don't worry, Ms. Gehring. This isn't a philosophical question. Policy 88, we're under place. Ensure that the river valley is accessible to all residents by incorporating barrier-free, having strategically located, etc. I realize this is a planning document, and of course, what you have in there is planning. But I have to think in a more holistic way. Why don't we just have transit go down to the river valley?
So that would be something, I guess, for the transit master plan and for their operational requirements or operational level of service that transit would provide. I'm not sure that would be something that we would look at in terms of the MDP specifically.
No, as I said, it's not MDP, but we're doing so much work to increase accessibility of the river valley, and yet one of the biggest barriers to accessibility is those people who rely on transit can't get to the river valley.
That is correct. There are a lot of people that actually don't want to go down and walk in the river valley because they have a hard time getting back up again. So definitely I can understand that sentiment.
So yeah, like I said, the MDP isn't the place, but we have to think of that holistically in that respect completely. All right, 85, what do I have? All right, ensure potable water needs are minimized. Did I jump in there, or is it still, oh, it's in park, so it is in place, yes. By requiring the open space system be planned and designed to efficiently manage water. Produce a study of current potable versus non-potable water sources. How effectively do we have non-potable water sources in our parks? Like, are we working towards that? Because yes, it makes no sense to be using potable water, expensive water for irrigation, etc. So could you just walk me through a bit more about what is happening in that area, what we're moving towards, what we're thinking there? Because I love the idea environmentally and from a cost perspective.
So Councillor Crowson, right now we are using irrigation water to top up some of our storm ponds to ensure that the stormwater quality remains good and doesn't become something that is odorous to adjacent residents or to people enjoying the water features. I will perhaps turn this over to Mr. Bazunas in terms of that question, and I'm not sure, perhaps Mr. Wojtowski as well could weigh in on what the current situation is with using that for irrigation.
So,
Byron, are you able to answer that one?
yeah, I can fill you in on some of the things we're doing now and some of the sort of approaches we're taking in terms of go forward as well. A number of years ago, I can't remember how far back it was, we actually did a study on our lakes, our stormwater ponds, and we discovered that there was an issue both with the quality of the water and also an opportunity to use canal makeup water or irrigation water to water the park around those lakes. Some of the lakes that we are currently watering with irrigation water are the one in Fairmont, so the Fairmont Park Lake. Chinook Lake is also watered by irrigation water. The Rotary rugby fields are watered by irrigation makeup water. There's a number of these places. Going forward in outline plans now, we require developers to show how they're going to route irrigation canal water to stormwater ponds to keep them fresh, and also use those for irrigation makeup water. The differential is quite large, and so the only time practically it makes sense to not use irrigation water is when it's a very small piece of land that, you know, the cost of running a line out there would be prohibitive. So we are moving that way, and this MDP sort of gives us overall policy direction to cover what we've been trying to push forward with over time.
So just to add to that, Councillor Croson, approximately 45% of our park's irrigation is non-potable.
Okay.
So just to give you that figure. And Parks does try to use storm pond water whenever possible for irrigation.
Wow, I wish I could do that in my house, not have to use expensive city water to water my lawn. But next time we design a complete new city from scratch, let's run 2 water systems, one potable and one non-potable. But we'll design that new city another time. Thank you, Ms. Gehring, for your answers. Thank you, Mayor Spearman.
Okay, you're welcome. Are there any further questions from council?
Mayor Spearman, I'm just wondering if council is getting a little bit punchy because we've had like 2 or 3 or 4 philosophical questions in the last half hour. So maybe people could just get it out of their system right now.
Well, just trying to see if there's any further questions. If there's no other questions, before I adjourn the hearing for today, City Council has scheduled future public hearings on the Municipal Development Plan. As a reminder, the last scheduled date is tomorrow, Thursday, April the 1st, which will focus on implementation and appendices. In addition, the public will have the opportunity to present on any other topic which has already been covered. It's expected that after the public hearing, City Council will consider any proposed directional resolutions for the MDP at the May 4th City Council meeting. Additional public hearings may be held if deemed necessary. Hearing no further questions, I now declare the public hearing adjourned until Thursday, April the 1st, starting at 4 p.m. In the meantime, I would ask that members of City Council refrain from communicating in any capacity about this matter with members of the public until the vote on the bylaw has taken place. Any member of the public is encouraged to submit or present at tomorrow's public hearing. Thank you.
Thanks all. See you tomorrow.